The jungle had stopped burning 3 hours ago, but the smell had not left. Rail Dunmore walked through the ash and broken trees with his rifle loose in his hands, not because he expected a fight, but because he always held it that way after a battle. It was a habit, one of the few that kept him alive. Orindal 7 was a wet world. Even now, with half the eastern forests scorched to black roots and grey mud, water dripped from the surviving canopy. It hissed when it hit the still hot ground. Rail's boots sank a little with each step. Behind him, the rest of his sweep team moved in loose formation. 4 soldiers and a corporal named Whis, who talked too much and meant well. They had been ordered to confirm the Vreth base was empty. The Vreth had pulled back fast, which was strange. The Vreth did not pull back. In 40 years of war across 100 systems, the Vreth advanced, or they died in place. Retreat was not something they practiced. So something had scared them off. Rail was not sure he wanted to know what. The base was not much. A forward position, prefab structures, half collapsed now, and burn marks from their own orbital support. The Vreth had left in a hurry. There were still supply crates near the landing pad. One of the prefabs had a door hanging open. Whis kicked through the wreckage and declared it clear in under 6 minutes. Rail was about to agree and call it in when he heard the sound. It came from the tree line, not from inside the base. From the jungle edge, near a cluster of massive root structures that had somehow survived the burn. The roots were wide as walls, rising up from the mud in arching tangles before plunging back into the ground. The sound was thin, almost nothing, like air escaping a very small space. Rail held up a fist. His team stopped. He listened. There it was again, a small, keening cry, the kind of sound that had no aggression in it at all, only need. He moved toward it alone. Whis started to follow, and Rail shook his head without turning around. Whis stopped. The roots formed a kind of hollow near the base of the largest tree. The bark was black on the outside, but the hollow was protected. Inside, packed with material that looked like dried vine fiber and something darker and fibrous that Rail could not name, was a nest. And in the nest, something moved. Gold, copper, those were the colors. The creature was roughly the size of a large dog, but it was folded in on itself, wings still wet-looking and pressed flat to its body. Its scales caught the gray light from the canopy and threw it back warm. Its eyes, when it opened them, were amber. A dragon hatchling. Rail had seen images in intelligence briefings. He knew what Vreth war dragons looked like as adults. He had never seen one newly born. He turned around slowly and saw what was behind him, just outside the hollow. The mother was dead. She had been enormous, 30 meters at least, from her broad bronze snout to the tip of her tail, which lay half buried in the mud. Her wings were spread in a way that said she had died trying to cover the nest. The orbital strike had caught her full. She was still warm. The ground around her was not burned. She had taken it herself. On her neck, intact and clearly visible, was a harness. Vreth military, high-grade polymer and alloy. And on the main buckle plate, a symbol Rail recognized from every enemy briefing he had ever sat through. The personal insignia of High Warlord Draven. Humanity's greatest enemy had kept a war dragon. This was her, and inside that hollow was the last thing she had done before she died. Rail stood very still for a moment. His earpiece clicked. Whis, Dunmore, bases confirmed clear, you find anything? Rail looked at the hatchling. The hatchling looked back. It did not snarl. It did not make a threat display. It just watched him with those amber eyes, blinking slowly, the way a creature blinks when it is too young to understand danger, but old enough to notice something new. He pressed his earpiece. Negative, just debris, nest was empty, some kind of animal dug through here. A pause, copy, moving to LZ. Rail crouched down slowly. The hatchling watched him the whole time. He reached into his kit bag and opened the main compartment. He was not thinking clearly. He would understand that later. In the moment, he was just moving, the way soldiers move when something needs doing and there is no manual for it. He pulled out his spare thermal layer. He laid it in the bottom of the bag. The hatchling did not fight him when he picked it up. It was warm, heavier than it looked, and it pressed its snout against his forearm as he settled it into the bag. Not biting, just touching. Rail zipped the bag most of the way, left a gap for air, stood up. He did not look at the dead dragon again. He walked back to his team. "All clear," he said. Whis nodded, and they moved toward the landing zone. The bag was warm against Rail's back the whole way. 3 days into the transit aboard INS Endurance, Rail still had not named the hatchling. He told himself this was practical. Naming it would mean he had decided to keep it. He had not decided that. He was simply keeping it alive until he figured out what to do with it. That was the extent of his plan, and he knew it was not much of a plan. The hatchling did not seem to require a plan. It required protein rations, warmth, and the occasional strange, low sound that Rail could only describe as questioning. A short, humming note that it made whenever he came back to the bunk after being away. Not loud enough to carry through the door, just loud enough to let him know it had noticed he was gone. He kept it in the lower section of his kit bag, folded into the thermal layer. He slept with the bag beside his bunk. The Endurance was a carrier vessel moving 1,500 troops and crew, and in the noise and motion of that many people, one small creature was easy to hide, as long as it stayed quiet. It stayed quiet. On the 4th night, it did not stay quiet enough. Rail came back from mess and found his bunkmate sitting on her own cot, watching the bag with calm, professional attention. Her name was Sorrel. She was a field medic, small, with close-cropped hair, and the kind of face that never showed surprise, because she had seen too much to be surprised by anything. The bag was making the questioning sound. Sorrel looked at Rail. Rail looked at the bag. "How long?" she said. "Since Orandal 7. She nodded slowly. "What is it?" "Dragon hatchling." Another slow nod. "Vreth war dragon." "Yes." She stood up, walked over, and unzipped the bag carefully. The hatchling blinked up at her. She held out one finger, the way you might offer your hand to an unknown dog. The hatchling sniffed it. Then it made a different sound. Lower, rolling, like water moving over smooth stone. "That's a purr," Sorrel said. "I know." She looked up at him. "You're in a lot of trouble, Dunmore." "I know." She zipped the bag back up. She sat down on her cot and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said, "I'm not going to report it." Rail exhaled. He had not realized he was holding his breath. "But I want to know everything," she said, "starting with why you took it." He did not have a good answer for that. He said, honestly, "I don't know." It looked at me. Sorrel was quiet, then, "Okay." That was all she said, "Okay," and then she started helping him. She was better at it than he was. She figured out the feeding ratio faster, learned to keep the protein rations soft enough for the hatchling's still-forming teeth. She tracked its growth with the same detached focus she used for patience. Within a week, she had a chart. "It's growing fast," she told him, "already twice the size it was when you found it." Rail had been reading. He had access to restricted intelligence files on Vreth war dragons, low level, but enough. They were not simple animals. Intelligence classified them as semi-sentient. They bonded deeply and permanently to a single person in early life. That bond, once formed, was the foundation of everything. The Vreth had built their war beast program around it. "It's imprinted on me," he told Sorrel. She looked at the hatchling, who at that moment was attempting to climb Rail's arm using its small claws, with great determination and no grace whatsoever. "I can see that." Far across human-controlled space, on a Vreth command ship, whose name translated roughly to Dominion's voice, a different kind of search had begun. Rail did not know this. He had no way of knowing this. He only knew what was in front of him, a creature growing faster than seemed possible, warm as a heater, watching him with amber eyes every time he moved. On the 7th night, something changed. Rail was asleep. He woke once, briefly, in the low dark of the bunk room. The hatchling had climbed out of the bag while he slept. It had positioned itself on his chest, curled small and tight, its head resting against his jaw. Its scales were smooth and warm. Its breathing was steady. Rail did not move it. He lay still and looked at the ceiling of the carrier vessel, listening to the hum of the engines. He had not slept through a full night since the Battle of Kell Station 14 months ago. That night he did. In the morning, Sorrel looked at him across the bunk room and said, "You look different." "Same as always," he said. She tilted her head. "No, you look like you slept." He didn't answer that. He picked up the hatchling, checked its wings, fed it, and told himself again that he had not named it and was not going to. By the time the Endurance reached its destination, it had a name. He called it Kara, an old word from the region where he grew up, the part of Earth that his grandmother still called home. It meant ember, the kind that stays alive under ash long after you think the fire is gone. He told Sorrel the name in the evening, almost offhand, like it was nothing. She smiled. She had a small smile, contained and warm. "Kara," she repeated. "Yeah, that's right." The Endurance docked, the war went on, and Kara grew. There were no windows in Draven's private chamber. He had requested it built that way. Windows were a liability on a warship, structural and otherwise. You did not need to see the stars to know where you were going. You only needed the numbers. The chamber was plain: a desk, a chair, a low shelf of tactical data cores, a single light source set dim, and on the far wall a projection. He had been watching it for 20 minutes. The footage was old, recorded 31 years ago on a world called Ashit during the early part of his command. In it, a much younger Draven walked across a training field while a bronze dragon, then only about the size of a large transport vehicle, paced beside him, not behind him, beside him, level, as if they were equals out for a walk. She had always done that, refused to walk behind. Draven had never corrected it. Her name was Varath, Morning Fire, in the old Vreth language that even most Vreth no longer spoke. He had given her that name himself, the day they bonded, when she had pressed her enormous head against his chest and breathed out a gust of warm air that smelled like copper and heat. That was 31 years ago. He closed the projection. His intelligence officer was waiting outside the chamber. Draven knew this without checking. He always knew where his staff were. He opened the door. The officer, a thin Vreth named Sorek, came to attention. "The sweep of Orindal 7 is complete, High Warlord." And Sorek did not flinch. He had served under Draven for 6 years and had learned to simply deliver bad news without flinching. The nest site was disturbed. Our ground sensor recorded a human soldier in the area approximately 2 hours after our withdrawal. The field report from the human unit states the nest was found empty. Draven was quiet. "We believe the report is false," Sorek continued. "The sensor data shows the soldier entering the hollow alone. He was there for 9 minutes. The nest disturbance pattern is consistent with careful removal, not destruction." Draven walked to his desk and sat. He folded his hands on the surface. His hands were large and scarred and very still. "The hatchling," he said. "We believe it was alive when taken." A silence, long enough that Sorek began to wonder if he should speak again. He did not. "The soldier's unit," Draven said. "Assigned to INS Endurance. We are tracking it now. The soldier's name is Rail Dunmore, Sergeant, 12 years of service, decorated, 14 confirmed engagements." A pause. "He has no prior connection to our Dragon program." "Of course not," Draven said. He picked up the soldier's identification file from the projected data. A face looked back at him, human, weathered, the kind of face that had been in too many firefights and had the eyes to show it. Draven looked at that face for a long time. He was thinking about Varath, not about her as a weapon or an asset or a command resource. He was thinking about the morning on Ashit when she had been young and bronze and ridiculous, chasing small flying creatures across the training field and snapping at them with delighted incompetence. He was thinking about the way she had slept, pressed against the wall of his command tent, and how the ground had been warm where she lay long after she rose in the morning. 31 years. She had never been afraid of anything. She had gone into bombardments and come back with burn marks and kept walking. She had fought 3 other war beasts in her life and won each time. She had been the most dangerous creature in the Vreth military for 2 decades. She had died trying to cover a nest. Draven set the file down. He did not allow himself anything that would look, from the outside, like grief. Vreth High Warlords did not grieve. It was not a cultural prohibition so much as a practical one. You could not command armies while you were feeling things. You trained yourself out of it. He had trained himself very thoroughly. It was simply that the chamber was very quiet. "I want a covert team," he said. "Not military, intelligence personnel only, no weapons profile, locate the Endurance, find where Dunmore is stationed. I want daily reports." Sorek made a note, "And the hatchling, if recovered." "It will not be recovered by force." Draven's voice was flat. "The hatchling is very young. Forcible separation at this stage would damage it, possibly permanently." Another pause, and Dunmore. Draven looked at the closed wall where the projection had been, at nothing. "I want to know what kind of man he is," he said. "Study his record, everything, not his combat record, his conduct record, how he treats subordinates, whether he has ever been reported for unnecessary force, what his commanding officers say about his character." Sorek looked slightly uncertain. That was also something he had learned to manage in 6 years. "Is there a specific reason, High Warlord?" Draven said, "Because the last piece of something I cannot replace is currently in his hands, and I want to know if his hands are worth trusting." He did not say it with feeling. He said it the way he said everything, evenly, precisely, like a calculation. Sorek nodded and left. Draven sat alone in the plain chamber, no windows, no stars. He opened the old footage one more time, just for a moment. Vareth, young, bronze, ridiculous, chasing things she was far too large to catch. He watched until the clip ended, then he closed it and went back to work. Helix Point was supposed to be a quiet posting. It sat at the far edge of contested space, officially classified as a research station, unofficially used as a place to send people who needed to be somewhere that was not the front line, but was not quite safe either. The staff called it the waiting room. You came to Helix Point when someone above you had not decided what to do with you yet. Rael had been there 6 weeks when the message arrived. Cora was now the size of a large wolf. Her copper and gold scales had deepened since Orindal 7, the colors richer, the way fire looks different when it has had time to settle and burn clean. She moved through Rael's quarters with the quiet confidence of a creature that had decided this space was hers and was gracious enough to let him share it. She slept across his feet. She ate approximately 4 times what he expected. She had learned her name in the first week. Sorrel, reassigned to Helix Point the same week Rael was, kept the growth chart updated. She no longer pretended it was purely professional interest. The message came through station communications as a priority encrypted personal channel, the kind of encryption that made station communications officers go pale and immediately pretend they had not seen it. It was addressed to Rael by name. He read it alone in his quarters, with Cora lying across his feet watching him with amber eyes. The message was formal, not cold exactly, precise. It identified the sender without ceremony, High Warlord Draven of the Vreth Dominion. It stated that Draven was aware of the hatchling's location and condition. It stated that he was making no military threat. It requested a meeting, one location, one time, no weapons, no teams, no recording. Draven would come alone. In exchange for this, Draven offered 3 things: a full intelligence file on Vreth troop movements in Sector 9, his personal guarantee of safe conduct, and an explanation, which he said Rael was owed, of why the hatchling mattered. At the bottom, a single line that Rael read 3 times. "I am not asking for her back. I am asking to see her. There is a difference." Rael's commanding officer, a broad and tired man named Colonel Fenn. wanted to use it as a trap, capture Draven. The war could end in a single operation. It was, from a purely tactical standpoint, a remarkable opportunity. Rail said no. Fen stared at him. That's not a request, Sergeant. I know, sir. You're telling me no. Yes, sir. A very long silence. Rail did not fill it. He was not sure he could explain it in terms that would satisfy a colonel who had never spent 6 weeks watching a dragon learn his name. He only knew that the message had not read like a trap. It had read like a man who had written 6 drafts and was still not satisfied with any of them. In the end, Fen let him go, because the intelligence offer was real, and because Fen was also a practical man, and because something in the message, which Fen read himself twice, gave even him pause. The meeting point was an outer observation deck on Helix Point's least used ring. No active sensors, wide sightlines, neutral ground, technically, in the way that all the edges of things are technically neutral. Rail arrived first. He stood near the viewport and watched the dark outside. Cora was with him. She was tense, the way she got when something was different. Her tail moved slowly, back and forth, and she kept looking at the door. The door opened. Draven was taller than Rail expected. He had only seen the man in briefing images and propaganda reports, always armored, always commanding some massive ship or standing over some ruined human thing. In person, he wore plain Vreth officer's clothing. No weapons. He looked like exactly what he was, a very old soldier who was tired in ways that rest did not fix. He stopped when he saw Cora. Cora went very still. The two of them looked at each other across 10 meters of empty deck. Rail watched. He did not speak. He was not sure what he was about to see, but something told him not to interrupt it. Cora stepped forward. One step, then another. Slow, deliberate, her head lowering slightly in the way she moved when she was curious rather than cautious. She crossed half the distance between them and stopped. She looked up at Draven. And then she smiled. It was unmistakable. Rail had seen it before, directed at him, directed at Sorrel once when Sorrel had brought extra rations. The jaw pulled wide, the amber eyes brightened, and from deep in her throat came that low warm sound, like water finding its way through warm stone. Every part of her said, I know you. I do not know how I know you, but I do. Draven went very still. He did not move for a long moment. He stood in the doorway of an observation deck in the middle of contested space and looked at this gold and copper creature who smelled, Rail only later understood, like Varath, like the mother, like something that carried the scent of everything Draven had lost. Then he crossed the remaining distance slowly and went down on one knee. He pressed his forehead to Cora's snout. She made the purring sound, the warm one, the one that meant everything was fine. Rail watched humanity's greatest enemy kneel on the floor of an observation deck and stay there, very quietly, for a long time. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would have fit inside that moment. Eventually Draven rose. He looked at Rail. His face was even, composed, the face of a warlord. Only his eyes were different. Thank you, Draven said. Rail nodded. Sit down, he said. We should talk. Draven sat. Cora settled between them, pressed against neither man and touching both. They began. The conversation did not start well. It started the way any conversation between two enemies starts when neither of them chose to be there and both of them are too experienced to pretend otherwise. Carefully, with pauses between each sentence that could have held a weapon. Draven spoke first. He told Rail about the intelligence file he had promised, Sector 9, Vreth troop positions, supply chain routes. He delivered it like a transaction, clean and quick. Rail received it like one. Then they both ran out of the easy part. Cora shifted between them. She put her head on Draven's knee without being invited. He looked down at her, and for a moment his hand moved, stopped, then rested on her neck. She did not react to the careful hesitation. She simply purred. She was bonded to Varath, Draven said, even in the egg. The mother's bond carries a scent signature, the hatchling would have known Varath her whole life before she broke shell. Rael absorbed this, and Varath knew you for 31 years. Yes. So Korra carries the memory of someone who carried you. Draven's jaw shifted slightly. You could describe it that way. A short silence, Korra's tail moved. She smiled at you, Rael said. It was not a question. He had been thinking about it since the moment it happened. Not at me, not at first, at you. I noticed. What does that mean to you, for what it's worth? Draven looked at him across the narrow deck. His expression was difficult to read, but not because he was hiding something. It was difficult to read because he was choosing words with the care of a man who rarely said true things out loud. It means she does not hold me responsible, he said finally, which is more than I deserve. Rael sat with that. He did not disagree. 11 human colony worlds. He knew the number. Every human soldier knew the number. You could have sent a military unit, Rael said, to Orindal 7, after recovered the hatchling by force. Yes. Why didn't you? Because she had already been carried by human hands for 3 days by the time I knew. Draven's voice was flat and factual. Forced separation at that stage would have broken the early bond. It would have harmed her. The damage would have been permanent. Rael looked at him. That's the only reason. Draven looked back. No. He did not elaborate. Rael did not push. He asked instead about a concept that had been forming in his head since before he arrived at the meeting. He called it a custody arrangement. He explained what it meant, both of them having access, both of them taking responsibility, the hatchling belonging to neither in full, but to both in part. Draven stared at him. I am going to need you to explain that again, the warlord said. Rael explained it again. Draven was quiet for a long time. Humans do this with children when families divide. Yes, that is a very strange concept. I know. Another silence. Korra sneezed. Both men looked at her. She blinked, apparently surprised by herself. Draven made a sound that was not quite a sound, not a laugh, something much quieter, something that had clearly not been used in a long time. Rael recognized it because he had made the same sound himself 6 weeks ago, when Korra had headbutted him into a wall on the Endurance. They talked for 2 more hours. Back inside Helix Point, Colonel Fenn was watching border sensor data with growing confusion. 3 Vreth patrol groups that had been advancing along the Sector 9 border had stopped, not retreated, not engaged, simply stopped and were holding position. Fenn sent a query to Fleet Command. Fleet Command sent one back asking what was happening. Nobody had an answer. On Draven's flagship, his senior war council was demanding one. He had returned from Helix Point without explanation. His intelligence officer Sorek had filed a full report of the off-record meeting, as ordered. The council had read it. They were not pleased. Draven sat at the head of the council table and listened to 3 senior commanders explain, in precise and formal Vreth, why what he had done was a strategic and diplomatic catastrophe. He waited until they were finished. Then he said, the border patrols have been halted. I have authorized no offensive action in sectors 7 through 11 for the next 30 days. The senior commanders looked at him. If anyone wishes to formally challenge my command authority, Draven said, they may do so in the established manner. No one moved. The established manner involved single combat. Draven had not lost a single combat since he was 19 years old. The meeting ended. Back at Helix Point, Sorrel was waiting in the corridor outside Rael's quarters when he returned. She had Korra with her. Somehow Korra had found her way back to Sorrel, which meant Korra had let herself out, which was new information. She opened the door herself, Sorrel said. I see that. Sorrel looked at him carefully. How did it go? Rael looked at the gold and copper dragon sitting in the corridor of a human space station, blinking amber eyes at him like she had not just done something that should have been impossible for a creature of her size and age. "I think something started," he said. Sorrel folded her arms, good or bad. He thought about it honestly, about Draven's knee on the floor, about the smile Korra had given him. About a war that had been running for 40 years, because nobody had found a crack in it yet. "I genuinely don't know," he said. Sorrel nodded slowly. "That's usually what good looks like at the beginning." Korra pushed past both of them and went inside. The door she left open. 6 months after the meeting on Helix Point, the guns went quiet. Not everywhere, not all at once. It happened the way real things happen, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a slow accumulation of small ones. A ceasefire on the Sector 9 border, then a stand-down in Sector 11, then a month of no new engagements anywhere along the contested line. Fleet Command called it a tactical pause. Intelligence called it an anomaly. The soldiers on the front called it something they were afraid to name in case namming it made it stop. Rail called it Tuesday because it was, and because he had learned not to look too hard at good things in case looking made them fragile. He was still at Helix Point. His rank was still sergeant. His title, unofficially, in the back-channel communications that moved between human and Vreth High Command now, was liaison. Nobody had given him that title officially. It had simply accumulated around him the way things accumulate around a person who is inexplicably in the same room when important things happen. He was in that room because Draven would not deal with anyone else. This was both an honor and a problem. It was a problem because Rail was a sergeant, and the people above him in the chain of command had complicated feelings about a sergeant being the single point of contact with the enemy's most powerful military figure. It was an honor for the same reason, stated differently. Colonel Fenn had been promoted to general and transferred to Fleet Command. His last act before leaving Helix Point was to shake Rail's hand, say absolutely nothing, and leave. Rail took that as approval. Korra was now the size of a horse. This was the most immediately visible change in Rail's life, and not a small one. She had grown in stages, each faster than the last, and now she moved through the corridors of Helix Point with the settled assurance of a creature who understood perfectly well that she was the largest thing in any given room. Her wingspan, when she stretched, blocked the light in the main hangar bay. Her scales, fully matured, were copper and gold in sun and firelight, and in the blue light of the station's main corridor they glowed like old metal, like something ancient and warm and serious. She was not a pet. She had never been a pet. She was a person in the only way that mattered, which was that she made decisions and had preferences and remembered things and held opinions about everyone she met. Her opinion of the Vreth guard, who had made an aggressive gesture toward Rail during the third negotiation session, was particularly clear. She had sat on him, not hurt him, simply placed herself on top of him and waited, while everyone in the room tried to figure out the correct diplomatic language for what had just occurred. The final report called it an unplanned de-escalation. Rail called it Korra being Korra. Draven had said nothing about the incident, but when the report was filed, Rail received a brief message from him that said only, her mother would have done the same. Vareth once sat on a war council member who insulted her harness fittings. He was there for 40 minutes. That was the closest thing to a joke Rail had ever received from Draven. He read it 3 times. They met regularly now, 6 times in 6 months. Always neutral ground, always with Korra present, which both of them had stopped discussing as optional. She was simply there. She moved between them, demanded attention from both equally, and tolerated no posturing. It was impossible to maintain the full weight of 40 years of war when a large dragon was pressing her snout into your shoulder and making the questioning sound. They did not become friends. That word fit neither of them, and neither of them would have accepted it. What they became was harder to name and more durable. 2 people who had looked at each other across something terrible and chosen, once, not to look away, and having made that choice once, found it slightly easier the second time, and the third. The war councils on both sides worked around them, tried to use the ceasefire to reposition, to rearm. On the Vreth side, Draven stopped 3 such efforts in closed session. The details were never confirmed. What was confirmed was that they stopped. On the human side, Rael was called to give testimony to a joint military committee about the nature of the ceasefire and how it had begun. He sat at the table across from 12 decorated officers and a civilian oversight board and told them the truth. He said a dragon smiled. That's where it started. The testimony was classified for 30 years. Sorrel left Helix Point at the end of the 6th month. She was needed elsewhere, which was the nature of being a medic in a war that was no longer quite a war, but had not yet decided what it was. She said goodbye to Rael in the main corridor. She said goodbye to Cora by pressing her forehead to Cora's snout, which Cora accepted with great dignity and a gentle puff of warm breath that left Sorrel's hair disarranged. "Take care of him," Sorrel told the dragon. Cora blinked once, slowly, the way she blinked when she had already decided. Sorrel left. The corridor felt bigger after. That evening on a green world at the edge of neutral space, where the 6th meeting took place, Rael sat outside against the wall of a temporary structure and watched the alien stars come out. Cora was beside him. Her head was in his lap. He had his hand on her snout. She was warm as a furnace and weighed approximately as much as a small vehicle and showed no sign of moving. Draven came across the field. He sat down a few meters away. No greeting, no formality. 2 soldiers watching the sky that was, for now, quiet. Cora lifted her tail and laid it across Draven's boots. Neither man spoke for a long time. The stars came out, the world turned, the guns stayed quiet. Wars end in treaties, in exhaustion, in the last bullets spent. This one ended the way things end when they last, because someone chose to care about something small, and the small thing turned out to be large enough to hold.